So the trailer for the new Game of Thrones series, House of the Dragon, just dropped with dragons, fire, blood, and history doesn't remember blood, it remembers names, etc. And as I was watching the trailer, this question stealthily started forming in the back of my mind. Do we really need this? When Game of Thrones came out more than 10 years ago, it changed the landscape of television not only for its unique storytelling for a fantasy story, but also for its production value, very strong cast, and the care that went into adapting an adult fantasy series, usually relegated to books or other written media. We had a story set in a fantastic world where magic and dragons took a backseat in a tale driven by strong characters and their politics. Cunning plots, wars, betrayal, all very well conducted by David Benioff and D.B. Weiss. Somewhere near the midpoint of the show, things started to fall apart and Game of Thrones ended in such a bad note that I honestly cannot bring myself to recommend that show to anyone. Although the first 3.5 seasons are some of the best stuff I have ever seen in my life, from there on things get progressively so bad that by the time you reach the end, the whole experience just feels like a giant waste of time. But then Game of Thrones did come to an end, and not much later this House of the Dragon thing came about. It was announced as being created and developed by the man George R.R. Martin himself, and it would chronicle events that happened 200 years before Game of Thrones. At the time, it struck me as odd that they would go on with it after the overwhelmingly negative response to the end of the original series. The first teaser had me quite excited for the show, but as I was watching the new trailer, it just occurred to me, do we really need this? Do we really need another Game of Thrones series? Do we really need to see this story? I mean, if this new series was supposed to be a sequel, I could kind of understand it. I would still be skeptical about it, but I guess I could understand it. But a prequel? After everything that happened to Game of Thrones near the end? Why? And this follows the same logic of not recommending the original series to someone, knowing what it will become by season 4 or 5. I mean, think about it. Why am I supposed to care about all these things that had already happened and that will in some way shape the story I already know will end with the last Targaryen becoming a useless weasel and fucking Arya stabbing the Night King? Oh my god, why the fuck Arya? We recently had The Many Saints of Newark, an original HBO movie that depicted the adolescence of Tony Soprano and how Dick Moltisanti influenced the boy that would become the mob boss we know on The Sopranos. And while the reaction to it was mixed, we were able to see an entire original story that provided background to what is depicted in what ended up being, from start to finish, one of the greatest, most important TV shows of all time. But let's put the story aspect aside for a minute. What can this TV series offer that we haven't already seen in Game of Thrones? Shady and clever political plots? Betrayal? Magic? Dragons? Vicious disputes for power and influence? Beautiful specimens of the male and female anatomies? We have already seen all of that done exceptionally well in the first seasons of Game of Thrones. In the same universe, with the same dynamics, and even the same-ish players as the trailer shows when it mentions the houses. And to top all of that, we already know how all we will see in the series will turn out in the future. And it's shit. It all turns to shit. I'm a great proponent that any story can be told, as long as it is done right. But to me, it feels like the best the House of the Dragon can do is to match the greatness of Game of Thrones' early seasons. It feels like more of the same.
Same situations, just different faces.
It kind of reminds me of when people thought it would be a good idea to make a spin-off starring only Joey after the end of Friends, one of the most cherished and successful sitcoms ever. It's like you're setting yourself up for failure from the get-go by trying to compete with your own magnum opus. But Watcher, Game of Thrones only turned to shit once they ran out of source material, you cry in defiance of my pessimistic take. This time it will be George R.R. Martin who's going to be writing the whole show. Sure, but the fact that it only turned to shit after they ran out of source material only means two things. How good of a fantasy writer George was on that source material, and despite everything they did wrong later, how good Dan and Dave were in adapting George's material. But make no mistake, kids, it is one thing to write a million fucking pages and make your story so big that you have to split it in 2 different books that take place at the same time. It is another one entirely to write a TV show comprised of 10 one-hour episodes. A writer who is a master of his craft on one format doesn't necessarily know how to do the other one properly. Those early Game of Thrones seasons worked so flawlessly because everybody did their jobs exceptionally well. George wrote his books, and Dan and Dave wrote their TV series based, and that word is very important here, on George's writings. You see, how a story works on a book and on a TV series are two very different things. It doesn't matter how good the book is, if you don't make a proper translation between the two mediums, it will fail. So, what does any of this predict about the upcoming show? Absolutely nothing. These are just the ramblings of an old, impatient man who has already seen enough good things turn to shit and is unable to jump on hype trains anymore. The show could be great, and I really hope it is. Or it could absolutely suck, or it could be, which is honestly the vibe I'm getting from it at this time.